Hello and welcome to the Spaceship Earth. My name's Dan Burgess. The concept of the Spaceship Earth is simple. We're living on a life-giving planet, hurtling through space, a bit like a spaceship. We have a finite amount of supplies and an intelligent operating system which keeps everything replenished as long as we all use it wisely. So, an understanding of how this system works, along with deep cooperation between humans, is essential to keep us and the spaceship flying. So in this podcast series, I'm having conversations with folks who are responding to the needs of Spaceship Earth, involved in healing and restoring, raising awareness and consciousness, and reimagining how we can live more beautifully through creativity, ideas, collaborations, new forms of business and more. I'll be talking to artists, photographers, entrepreneurs, writers, designers, activists, healers, creative mavericks, and many more. In this episode, and continuing the ocean theme, I'm really excited to share a conversation with the really inspiring Easkey Britton. Easkey is a true pioneer, an internationally renowned big wave professional surfer, a scientist, an academic, social activist, and an artist from Donegal in Ireland. She's actually named after a surf break. How awesome is that? Her parents taught her to surf when she was about 4 years old, and her life has revolved around the ocean ever since. We talk about a ton of stuff, with some focus on her light water platform, the journey from big wave pro surfer to setting up and running a surf school project in Iran, exploring gender issues through surfing and ocean connection. We talk about the challenge in today's society through disconnection from the natural world, the links between the environment and our health. We talk a bit about the contrast of living in kind of modern, constructed and controlled environments which shape so much of how we live now, and how that contrasts with being in the ocean or more wild and unpredictable environments. We explore a bit our relationship with water, not just the ocean but our own inner source. We talk a bit about burning out through activism and how to look after ourselves and connect with our wider communities. We talk a bit about the interconnectedness of ocean health and human health, and making the ocean more seen and heard in our lives, and loads more. It was a real pleasure to connect with Easkey, and I really hope you enjoyed the session. Hello.
How's it going? Great to reconnect.
Yay! I know. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has done.
I was just trying to figure that out actually. And I think it'd be about 2 years ago. I think.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Because where are you now?
Yeah, I'm in Galway at the university. So back on campus.
Yeah, because the last time, I think when we Skyped, I think you just been in Papua New Guinea, and I think you were were either in, was it New Zealand or Australia? And I was up a mountain in Italy.
16. So yeah, exactly 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow. Well,
I know. Continuing on that trajectory though, but yeah, a lot has changed, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of stuff just continues to unfold as it does, and I've got a couple of streams of work coming on, as I said, which I was keen to just be able to, just to share with you, to get your thoughts. And then at the same time, because a lot of change has been going on in my world, I'm in the spirit of the podcasting revolution that's occurring. I was dabbling a bit last year, and I thought, well, actually, I'm going to start building out this podcast series as an experiment. And try and combine the sort of the inquiries that I'm kind of going on in my kind of work and generally with being able to kind of create some audio artifacts to sort of put out into the world, because I think a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, I'm sure you're doing, I'm always thinking, well, actually these conversations, they're rich, and there's lots of learning, and there's lots of sort of ideas and questions that I'm sure I know others also appreciate. So hence this is my new podcast. It's called the Spaceship Earth.
I love the concept.
Got to have a concept. So yeah, and I say, and there's a little bit of stuff going on around this piece of work that I'm doing around ocean literacy, as it's being framed, which I was curious about. But I also just want, as I say, what I really wanted to also is just to, because I sort of see how your work unfolding, and and you're quite regularly being interviewed and writing and whatever. And I was just I was really curious about some of the stuff you're doing, I guess maybe more now under your frame of like water as well, and just just understanding a bit about that. So I had a kind of rough sort of I mean, still in a very emergent sense, but I did have a sort of bunch of sort of questions. So I wondered whether we could just like do a piece on these things. And see where it gets us. I'm sure we'll go down.
So you can probably start with like one or two questions and we'll fill it out.
Exactly. I know. But is that all right? Does that sound okay?
Yeah, it sounds brilliant, Dan. It's great. It's exactly where I'm at right now. I mean, both like literally physically, but also, it'd be great to share what's current in my life, and having to dredge up. I mean, it obviously it's the influence of my whole life journey so far, but it's great to sort of, I'm really excited to dive into this stuff.
Great.
Yeah, we'll see what comes up rather than having to
Brilliant.
Repeat stories.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's good. So okay, so I mean, I guess I was going to start, if I can, because I say there's a lot of kind of your thinking and your projects are sort of out there in the world, but I wanted to start with really because I think it's fair to say that you're a bit of a mashup, right? and I say that as from someone who also sort of feels like they're a bit of a mashup in terms of what they do. But I guess you do many things, right? A lot of people know you for your surfing and the big wave surfing. But you're a scientist, you're an artist, you're an academic, you're a social activist. You've founded not-for-profits, you've made films, you've explored loads of groundbreaking work around gender and gender equality and gender issues. And I guess at the heart of it all, though, is what sort of connects it all is the ocean, right? So yeah, I guess I think that's obviously, and there's so much in that and in your journey, but just to kick off, what that whole idea of this sort of all these different pieces to your work and your life, how do you sit with all of that now, and has that been is that challenging? I guess I'm curious, because I know, like, in my own experiences, sometimes folks, it's like, well, you do this and you do that and you got this and there's that, and sometimes I found that sort of slightly frustrating. But I just wondered where you feel. It seems to me that's a sort of a very kind of sort of solid place for you right now. But I'd love to know a bit more about that sort of multiple.
Yeah, no, it's something I think about lots, and I've been exploring loads. Like, increasingly we see that there's sort of these more, I guess, multifaceted lives. And truth be told, I think we all play multiple roles. And it seems like on paper, when you just wrote out that list, that you'd have to be a crazy person, to be doing all those things. But I don't see any of them. Instead of being defined by what it is that I do, it's kind of like you said, it's the constant being really rooted or connected with that thread that links them all. And that's this passion for the ocean that's just been a constant for me since like forever. And so that really kind of helps keep me grounded. And then I feel like all those other things are just ways of giving more creative expression to that. And for me, I'm the kind of person who really wants to explore in lots of different ways. Like, I think I couldn't deal with just being stuck in one mindset, like in the academic. And then I feel like to feel balanced, that I also need to indulge in the artist or the explorer or so it's kind of mediums for me to explore or express the same thing, which what really lights me up is when it gets down to it all, is that human connection or relationship with our environment, and especially like water and the sea. So yeah, and for me personally, that's been an experience, something that I want to explore at a personal level, but then I'm also saying that actually this is a really big thing in the world.
Yeah, right. And like I said, so this, quite recently you've started to pull a lot of your work together or at least it seems that way. You're starting to pull it together, and there's this kind of, I guess, this framing of like water that you've put out into the world. So I'm fascinated by that from this idea of, this sort of spaceship Earth perspective. I'm sort of really interested in ways that I guess our wider sort of living systems and non-human worlds, how we can sort of re-engage people in that through a sort of deeper understanding, I guess, of what it is to be human, and the possibilities that come from that sort of connections or reconnections, I guess. So tell me about the Light Water project and sort of, why you're landing it now. And
yeah, I could probably fill an hour with all the reasons why it's come about, and why now is an interesting one too, because we've been talking, it sounds like, wow, I've really got my shit together now and I'm really focused on like what it is I want to do, but like, it doesn't happen overnight. No. And it'll change, right? So I definitely went through, I guess it's kind of in the last 5 years it's really been shaping up, and a turning point was probably around the time of 2013 was a defining year for me, because that was the year I got invited to give the TEDx talk in Dublin. And I just remember being really struck then with about being invited, and sort of my initial reaction being, goodness, like what do I have that's worth telling? What is that story or message? I was given this opportunity to have such an incredible platform, and it was a chance for me to really dig into why I'm doing what I'm doing and pull together, and I guess both find my own voice and my own, what my story is, what story it is that I want to tell. And so really having to distill the essence of that in a very focused way, like in less than 15 minutes on a TEDx talk.
That's
helps
a good
you
constraint,
sharpen your lens. And then since then, it's been, I guess, that kind of set the course in a way. It was a chance to sort of set down my own blueprint when it comes to this, where I'm at right now around nature connection, ocean and human health, and all of that, which I'm sure we'll get into. And it was also the year that I went back to Iran, and it was the first time that I went surfing there with some Iranian women. And we made that documentary, Into the Sea.
That was 2010, wasn't it? Was that originally?
Well, I spent 10, but we didn't really connect with anyone. Just myself and Marion. But 2013 was the turning point really there in the story, because that's when Mona and Shala came on board, and these young Iranian sportswomen. And so they kind of shaped the future surfing history, I suppose, of their country by coming along and being sort of like the pioneering first surfers of Iran.
Amazing.
And kind of that trust we all had in each other to sort of enter this complete unknown. But through that whole journey there, like that's sort of in a way how Like Water has evolved from that experience. So my relationship with the sea and surfing totally shifted by seeing it in that context in somewhere like Iran, and the impact it could have to, I suppose, the potential of how it could be used differently as a way to open up these spaces and create possibilities for people to connect across so-called barriers. And I suppose that connective force.
Had you sort of sensed that? Or was it as quite a breakthrough, kind of seeing this thing happening in front of you, which is what I'm just sort of curious as that whole, because you talk a lot about, creating spaces within, the ocean context to sort of explore, break down barriers, explore new possibilities. So I'm just curious, have you always sort of sensed that or the possibility with that?
Yeah, it was kind of like this moment on the beach in Iran, where it was like this remembering, it's like everything we're seeking, I think we just already have. It's almost either a way of that remembering process of sort of like excavating through the layers of the need to unlearn and return to the beginner's mindset. And there was a perfect context for the beginner's mindset, because it had never been done before. Like, this was the first time surfing and kind of been more formally introduced, I suppose. But, so we're just learning how everything works, and anything was possible, rather seeing it that way rather than it maybe seeming all impossible. Yeah. So it totally depends on your lens. But I guess I realized that, no, this is something I've always known and felt, but then I just come through, I guess, a period of traveling the world solo a lot, but being much more in the competitive surf world, the sponsored kind of rider, and being quite, I suppose at that stage, maybe disillusioned with that way of being in the world, like feeling like, oh, we need to go a lot deeper here and rapidly.
That must be quite.
But then
that must be quite an interesting journey to go on, though, because I'm guessing, there's at the start of moving into a professional capacity in something like surfing. I'm imagining at the start, I could be completely wrong here, but I'm imagining it must be pretty incredible to be sort of seeing your progress and traveling and being amongst all this sort of talent. And I guess it must be, yeah. And then like you say, something shifts, something starts to change.
Yeah, and it was kind of around, that sort of transition that happens maybe when you move out of your early 20s into your mid to later 20s as well, and so it's where I was at maybe in the life cycle. But it's funny because then I had kind of forgotten, but like that whole the sea's capacity, I suppose, to connect and heal was something that was very kind of deeply instilled in me from such a young age. And I kind of had, my mum sort of reminded me then how I was like 10 years old. I grew up in Rasnaila, this beach in Donegal on the west coast of Ireland. And I guess I'd been very aware when I was younger of the whole Chernobyl children, that there's a Chernobyl Children's Project, a charity in Ireland, who, after the Chernobyl disaster, the nuclear disaster, it's run by a woman called A.D. Roach. And she was quite, kind of actively campaigning at the time. And but anyways, what they did was they bring kids. They were even then bringing kids over to Ireland for the restorative benefits of being in a healthy environment, like breathing fresh air and being by the coast. And so I met some of these kids who were the same age as me. A lot of them kind of suffering from various illnesses or cancers, and just being struck by the impact for them of being in what I had sort of grown up in and taken for granted, and then taking them to the sea at my beach, and just for someone to see the sea the first time, and then I took them surfing one of their visits. So even then and there, I guess I was already doing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, just that kind of connection that happened. I think when you're young and when you're a kid, you really intuitively already know this stuff, and then somewhere along the way it gets a bit lost.
Yeah. Why is that? It's crazy, isn't it?
A few opinions.
Yeah, exactly. Well. We won't start with that one because then I'll end up ranting probably. Yeah. So.
And I guess it was. So I kind of set it up just last year, and in one level, it's simply like my own sort of sandbox to be creative and experiment beyond the confines of being in academia, and just being able to more creatively explore in a way these things around the impact of being in the water, and especially from like a woman's perspective. And so there's different kind of elements to it, and also as a way for me to, I suppose, it was a maturing of what had started in Iran, and we created a charity there at that time around 2013 called Waves of Freedom. And its purpose was really to help facilitate the growth and development of surfing in whatever way was needed. So initially by just providing equipment and the training, and so it's essentially to raise funds for that, and to continue to support women's surfing in particular, obviously. But then I guess I learned so much from that and from those women. I thought, God, this really translates on a much bigger scale. And combined with that and a longing for myself to sort of reconnect with Ireland and be home more, I thought, I think there's a real need to bring some of this back. Like, I'm all the way here in the edge in Iran, and it's amazing. But they're also doing their own thing in their own way. And I think I need to, it was part of my own homecoming in a way. And then a way for me to sort of get a bit clearer on what my own philosophy is around this, my version of sea connection, I suppose.
It's interesting, even on, just as you're talking, even on I just started thinking about, learning to surf and how you're taught and all that kind of stuff. And I was even just thinking, even just from my own experiences, and also now just watching my kids going to kind of surf lessons whenever we get out, to the ability to do that. But I'm sort of curious about that, because that still seems, at least in my experience, to be very kind of focused on the skills of surfing. And I'm sure there's great people all over the world who are sort of widening that into a more deeper connection, but it still seems a little bit sort of almost affected by the way a lot of our sort of education works. What's your thoughts on that?
That's huge. That was one of the biggest takeaways for me, being in Iran, and initially being limited by simply because there didn't have enough surfboards or whatever, so having to create a more collaborative sharing environment anyways for learning. uh, and then that playfulness and then kind of enthusiasm and curiosity everyone had because it was so new and novel, and it was I was keen to explore, like, how might it be done differently? Like, we don't have to do it the way it's always been done. So taking a step back and kind of remembering what it was like for me to learn how to surf, and it was more on learning how to understand the ocean and playing in the waves, even without a surfboard, because getting your hands on a surfboard is like gold dust anyways. They were, to make do with whatever bits and pieces you could find to float on before you kind of grew into it. So that was kind of like the Like Water came about from a program I developed with another Iranian woman called Shireen Girami in Iran, and we called it Be Like Water. And it was really as an approach for women and girls who wanted to experience surfing for the first time, but to create this safe and trusting space and focusing a lot more on that feeling and relationship with water and the waves. And the intention really was to challenge those more, I suppose, dominant modes, which surfing has learned, which is a lot more on the technique and the performance and it's just essentially a much more masculine way of breaking it all down into its parts and steps, and rather than it being much more fluid and connective and immersive. So, and then when we kind of approached it that way, it led to this really profound kind of connection with the body and breath and water that really helped, I guess, enhance that sense of connection really with our own selves and in our own bodies, but also with each other. And then the trusting that being able to build that trust amongst each other, so that when we went into the sea and the surf, there was already that connection with water and the waves, so it was a brilliant way to overcome fear and things like that.
It's fascinating. And so because when you're talking about that and the connection and trust and all kinds of, and it just makes me think of it's making me think not just working with groups of people and not talking about gender and not even in the ocean. It's just like, it feels like so I guess this is what's exciting for me, is this sort of feels like this is part of a much bigger kind of shift that's sort of we're seeing sort of signals and signs of in multiple ways, really, about how we may sort of think of ourselves as humans and our relationships to the non-human world. And I saw it as something you were talking about recently about in terms of when you're looking at sort of the gender equality work you've done, but also recently when we look more broadly at what's going on with gender. And I think you said something like it's deeper than just sort of gender alone. It's more about, we're coming more to the feminine, which is much more about our relationships to environment, to nature, to ourselves, to others. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I wrote a piece recently along that, because Finisterre, who I'm an ambassador for now, they've launched this women's wetsuit tester program, which I think is a great approach to like creating a product that's supposed to be like functional and designed for women in a cold water environment, that the actually starting point is, let's get the input from women who are experienced in these environments and understand what their needs are and how this is going to work. So I think that's really cool approach. But it's also open space to have a conversation, of what our role is within surfing, in terms of like how we see ourselves, how we're seen by others, and obviously how that gets portrayed in the media and stuff. And just this idea, I suppose, when you go to, it was kind of sparked by going to, say, surf film festivals, or indeed probably if you go to any film festival, but how few of the films or edits were made, by women, or featured women in them, especially in the context of, I suppose, cold water surfing. And so this sort of invisibility, even though, like, say, the audience and the crowd would be over 50% women watching it, and so they all had the connection with the sea. Right. That was reflected, and I think the storytelling is different, obviously, as a result, and it kind of persists within that more adventure sport, adventure tourism world as well, where it's this idea of like conquering the mountain or slaying dragons, almost this domination over nature, when in actual fact I think it's a lot more in those situations of challenge. It's to do with I suppose much more what are considered more feminine qualities, so that in order to commit to taking off on a huge big wave. It's actually a lot more to do with being how present and self-connected you are in the moment. It's about how you're taking all that sort of energy and information in through all of your senses, and then ultimately it's that letting go moment, which is a surrender to this force that's greater than yourself, and becoming part of that. So I just felt like that's the reality of experience for so many people, men and women, but it's very, very rarely portrayed in the storytelling. And then the other aspect is too, it's not just as simple as creating, say, gender quotas or that. I was trying to unpack like why, and I think a lot of it is to do as well with how we why we surf and how we socialize, and to begin with, if there are fewer women, we tend to just surf a lot more by ourselves because we're trying to fit it in around work and the rest of our lives, and then a lot of these sort of trips that happen, the opportunities to sort of document surfing tend to be they're just like very much lads road trips. Like if you're the only woman in the local creed, not to get invited along. For all those gender-based reasons, and so it was how could we create a space where it's more supportive and allows us to dive more deeply into, instead of trying to copy the way of telling these stories, like find our own stories. So that was the motivation to really bring that storytelling element into Like Water. So what's a woman's perspective and experience of water and the impact it has on her life, and then creating even workshops around that. So at Shore Shots, which is that surf film festival in Ireland, we have a creative storytelling workshop that I run for women, which is really fun, just to share some of the, I guess, tools and approaches I take to how we tell stories.
Yeah, right. Amazing. I think there's what you're talking about, the woman's relationship with water, and I'm just sort of thinking about water anyway a lot at the moment with a bunch of stuff, and it's just it's interesting. I guess there's, from an ocean perspective, the plastic pollution, noise and energy and awareness is obviously starting to raise consciousness in some ways. I guess I'm talking about from the perspective of the UK, and but I think the ocean is it's in the press pretty much every day at least at the moment, and there's something going on. But I guess we are sort of creatures of water, really, aren't we? And it's sort of as you start to unpack the kind of facts of the reality of our relationship with water and the ocean, and the every second breath idea, and that the majority of the planet is water, and it's actually a blue planet, not an Earth, and all these kind of things. And I guess it's fascinating for me, particularly for folks who aren't living on coasts or aren't spending huge amounts of time in the water. But what I think this leads into your work around sort of health and well-being. But what are these impacts of just being near water, and how that's how that has the potential, I guess, in having, or in sort of forming new relationships between humans and the ocean and maybe water more broadly.
Yeah, but it's a really exciting space to be in right now, and I think sort of the research or science and evidence around it is really really growing. It's kind of a playing catch up, I suppose, to what those of us who are sort of ocean minded or sea connected already kind of intuitively already know and feel. So within the Near Health Project, you kind of get to dive into that more deeply, and especially with my area, I'm looking at blue spaces, so water environments.
Tell me about the Near Health. Tell us about what it is, what it's about.
So Near Health, it's a project funded in Ireland by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Health Service. So it's interesting to see those two guys create that connection, have that conversation, and finally kind of waking up to how the environment and healthy environments are really interconnected with human health.
Yes, I know. It's like, really? Was it William Burr? Was it the Natural Health Service? He used to coin, I think, the phrase, which was a nice way of sort of thinking about this stuff. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, there's a real sort of body of work emerging around it. There's colleagues of ours in the UK who are doing a lot, and across Europe and the rest of the world. But so within that, again, it's looking at how you create spaces that facilitate nature connection for health and well-being in different ways. And we're trying to understand that at the community level in Ireland. So people's perceptions of what nature means to them, and what it means to be healthy. So rather than coming in saying, okay, this is, a more prescriptive kind of role, we're trying to open up a deeper understanding of how people experience nature in the outdoors in Ireland, and then looking at what the links are, especially the restorative benefits, and just basically how people value and connect with it, and also the better understanding of the barriers. So like what's stopping people from engaging with the outdoors and nature more? Why is there that disconnect? And then also at the same time, what are the bridges? So what's enabling people to connect and get out there? And it's starting to take shape now. And,
what are you finding out? What are you finding out? Well, there's some headlines.
Secret. No, it's not. Again, it's probably not rocket science, but it's good to understand in the context. I guess, there's things that we do. So we know being outdoors and being in nature is good for us, but we don't know like what kind of nature, how long for, what dose do we need? What activity do we do? Is it just being in the sea, or is it actually that activity of surfing that has an added effect, and then the restorative qualities? So it's kind of starting to better understand the different qualities and aspects and the impact it has in a more nuanced level. But essentially, like in terms of barriers, they're kind of ones that are very much linked, I suppose, to people's perceptions. There's this real difference kind of emerging perhaps between urban and rural, and an assumption that if you live out, in the countryside, that you're more connected or have more access to these areas. In Ireland, actually, it's really tricky because of, land ownership and like actual barriers, like, barbarian fences.
Can't get
even difficult to get to some surf breaks, and then dangerous roads. And then in urban settings, this sort of kind of, in a way, misperception of what nature is. So thinking it's something that's out there rather than all around us. So therefore, you can't seek it in these more urban environments. But then the interesting thing is like, well, what's sort of helping people to connect more? And it's definitely through, it's interesting to see the impact of these more sort of social events and the kind of organization at a community level. So things like one of our case studies is with beach cleanups. And in Ireland, they're like facilitated by Clean Coasts, and they have this huge network of over like 600 coastal care community groups. And that's really interesting to look at that as a way for people to connect with nature, because they kind of sign up and do this activity. And it's just interesting to see that a huge part of it is the social benefit and interaction we get out of it as well, like the relationships that get formed and in unexpected kind of ways. And then you're doing something like a beach cleanup, so it's this sort of environmental activity, purpose is to clean up beach, and yet then we're seeing now that it actually has this impact on our sense of well-being and health and mood and community connectedness and things like that.
Yeah, I guess it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I've got a history of doing quite a bit of work with the kids and nature disconnection this sort of participation, finding ways to participate, to find connection that through a more social activity or so not only sort of making that more connection to the kind of non-human world, but also sort of interacting with others around you that you probably had no idea, and it's sort of really interested in these ways of how do we become more participative in the world, and also through that discover and reconnect through these new relationships with the living world. It's I think the health sort of, I love these mashups, the sort of Environmental Protection Agency and the Health Service. You think, you know what I mean? It just makes total sense. It sort of draws me as well to, if I sort of think back to the sea or the ocean, as I'm told, it is the ocean. It's one ocean. It's not oceans, and you shouldn't say sea. Apparently, that's what I've been told. But I think I guess there's a couple of questions here, but the one around, I guess, which Bill is part of the work you're doing, but around there's like the work that's been done on blue minds and the impacts on our kind of on our kind of mental health and well-being, and then these blue zones in parts of the world where people are living very near to the ocean, and obviously they're eating more plant-based diets, but they're living longer, richer lives, and it sort of feels like there's all this there's this stuff again. It's like you say, it's not it's not new. It's been sort of around. I mean, we've known it probably as humans back in, for thousands of years back in terms of we're probably way more connected. But why is it? Why now do you think that the interest is rising?
Oh, well, I think because we need a response to being at a crisis point across the board. And I don't think we can stay in a place of continuing that story of this artificial separation between ourselves and our environment any longer. It's because it's catching up with us. A case in point, like we've with the going back to the plastics issue. It's kind of just horrifying to think that because of our, behaviors of consumption and attitudes and this throwaway kind of culture that we're now, we've got these, microplastics that's in our drinking water. So essentially we are gone full circle and are consuming our own waste.
It's not pretty, is it?
And if that isn't proof for our, the interconnectedness of humans and the environment and the ocean, I don't know what is. So it's a real indicator, I suppose, of how entangled we are, and that's a wake-up call then. Because I think also why environment and health, I think when it starts to hit home more personally and there is more of a response. So if it has an impact on our health, it's one of our sort of core values that we have in terms of what we consider to be our well-being. Then people start to also wake up a bit more. And the issue has been too, instead of, I find with the approach of the Near Health Project as well, it's been much more of a positive framing to get at these issues that have otherwise seemed quite overwhelming or very negative, and people switch off. So it's how do you create that emotional connection? And I think when you sort of come at it from that approach of thinking about health, and it allows us to look at what it means to be healthy in a different way too, which is really needed. Then people are, it just lends itself to more innovative ways of looking at the challenges and framing it from a sort of well-being perspective rather than this doom and gloom scenario of, it's too late.
And what does it mean to be healthy, would you say now? This is there a sort of a reframing of that or a widening of that? Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, I think increasingly people are seeing that it's much more holistic, and it's it's really multifaceted, and in terms of, I guess, our physical and psychological health and how interwoven they are, and also about our, I guess, the context of where we are, like how we live, so those choices that we make in our lives and then where we live. It's definitely how the environment shapes who we are. So this realization that it's not just us kind of shaping the environment to our will, but it's also having this influence on how we're able to live our lives. And increasingly that's what we're seeing, obviously, if you look at the climate change and being one example of having to respond now.
It's like there's something about this, for me, when I think of the ocean and I think of my experiences, and I think about some of the issues that we're sort of facing in this kind of highly developed modern society, but there's something about being in the ocean about which anyone who spends time in the sea knows, which is that you can't control the environment that you're in. It's constantly changing, it's unpredictable, it's never the same. And there's something about that, and it's from my own personal experience, is what that's one of my big connections, is because I find that's one of the only places where I can find presence and stillness in many ways, because I'm awake. I'm conscious of this ever shifting environment. It makes me think about on land, and particularly I do a lot of work in cities and sort of highly constructed and controlled environments, which, let's face it, is most of our sort of systems. Most of our institutional systems are created or designed to be as controlled as they can be. Schools, offices, houses, hospitals, probably. So I'm kind of, what is going on there? Because my sense is that I tend to feel increasingly more alive in uncontrolled environments, whether that's the ocean, whether that's forests, whether places where there is some sense of change and shift and uncertainty. but I'm sort of looking as well about how we, most of us spend a huge part of our living, waking hours in these more controlled environments, and I'm wondering what's the connection between that and also maybe some of this kind of suffering and that we're seeing. I don't know. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's I think you're really hitting on something big, and it kind of is really linked, these controlled environments that we've created. It sort of really feeds this sort of risk averse society that we're also seeing, and it's kind of always economically framed, right?
Right.
But it's interesting. I've done some workshops with younger groups, teenagers and kids. We part of the Near Health Project. We had one of our case studies is surf therapy program too. Over the summertime, there's a few things they said. It was trying to understand why surfing, what is this draw that they have to the sea, and it's not also for everyone. Like some other kids, they might prefer horse riding, or it might actually be football. But for this particular group of kids too, it was they weren't keen on the traditional sports that get offered typically in PE at school or the team sports, and this ability, I think, to be exactly that, to be in this environment that is unpredictable and constantly changing, but as they kept saying, allows them to be fully who they are, to feel all of themselves, because it's so just kind of, like you say, it's really enlivening and wakes all the senses because of the stimulus. It's like the sound and the smell and the movement, and these kids are all on the autism spectrum, but what they also really loved was the power and force of the wave. So like feeling the wave hit their bodies, and they got just more and more stoked, like the bigger the waves. Right. And then with this group of sort of teenagers at a secondary school just this week, and one of the girls, they had the chance to go try out surfing as part of their school curriculum. What I would have given for that, but anyway.
That's good. That's good progress there. Good progress right there.
Yeah, that's progress. But she commented on actually what one of the best things was that it was so challenging, which I thought, wow, that's really interesting. She's like, yeah, you go out and you keep trying, you keep getting knocked down, but you feel really great about yourself after it, because there's that sense of, I suppose that self-actualization, of that overcoming. Like, I think when we are just beyond our comfort zone too, there's that's when the real sort of growth and learning and insight happens. And with surfing too, it's especially for young people and kids, there's that real autonomous element to it, because you are on your own. Like, even if you're surfing with other people, like when you're on that wave, there's no one holding your hand really or with you, and so for that moment you have to sort of figure out yourself in your own world. And it's really lovely to see. But then, as you say, with that, the challenges, and always has been, and I've seen it even in Iran, it can be so transformative. But then how does that translate when you come back ashore? So like the coming ashore part is the real interesting and challenging part
the
of the story.
return.
And how do you bring that to people who don't have access to the opportunities that we have to be able to go down to the beach, or to surf, or get in the water, or to be out in nature as we see it.
Have you on that? Because I was having some conversations and things recently, and looking. And I don't know where I sit with all this stuff, but I've been intrigued by it, of the sort of virtual technologies. And so I guess the question of, there's 7.5 billion people, whatever we are on the planet, and many of us are living in cities and urban places. And let's just talk about the ocean, right? Because that's what we're talking about. But just in terms of that, if you're not close to, then the ocean is a sort of potentially a destination for you if you're lucky. But for many, it won't even be that. It'll just be a thing. What have you thought about? I mean, are you coming across people now exploring things like VR and these kind of technologies, and the possibility of being able to bring some of this benefits, but through?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's not feasible, nor is it sustainable, I suppose, to get people out to all these, it wouldn't be pristine for very long if you had 7 billion people tramping through it. And it's issues in Ireland we're having here. We had the Wild Atlantic Way, kind of was this sort of huge tourism success story where they sort of mapped out the Atlantic coast of Ireland. Essentially nothing changed. It was like we've always had that coastline, and all they did was sort of rebrand it, essentially. And it's amazing in one level, but in another level, it's also now the issue is becoming when you have so many people, say on the cliffs of Moher, or in sort of the Burren landscape, where you have these more vulnerable or sensitive environments, how you want to promote people to go outdoors and connect with nature, but how do you make that interaction a positive one for both the environment and the people? And so colleagues of ours are actually looking at just that, this thing of the augmented reality and VR in the University of Exeter. And there's a European Centre for the Environment and Human Health based there. And they're, I think, primarily looking at it in the context of palliative care as well. So how we can even get a restorative benefit from from being immersed virtually in these sort of nature-based experiences. And yeah, I kind of find that fascinating. How
is that
I've done a few exercises.
Is that?
Yeah,
yes.
Mike DePledge.
Yes,
is the sort of one of the founders of it. Amazing man, and work that he does, along with Laura Fleming. Professor Laura Fleming heads it up now too. And Matt White is another researcher who's done loads on the sea and the benefits for health in the UK. But what I've also found too, and I think it's what Wallace J. Nichols writes about a lot in Blue Mind, in terms of the psychology, like that simply visualizing ourselves in nature or in water in the sea can have a profound effect on our whole sense of well-being and our biochemistry and our mood. And it's amazing because that's a technique that's been used loads with elite athletes for enhancing performance in sport, and now it's actually can enhance your nature connection.
Amazing.
So I think it's also realizing that going back to water and how it's a metaphor, but also how literally we're made of water. Over, I think it's well over 70% of our body is water, very similar to the earth. And this notion, I suppose, that within our cells and our DNA and our blood, it's the same makeup as salt water, and that we have we still have within us that capacity that we once had from our ancestors when we were in the sea to be underwater even. And so I think we could learn a lot by also tapping into that. So this idea I've just started to kind of explore more around inner waterscapes. So the sort of water systems within our bodies, as well as the natural water system outside.
A bit about that.
Yeah, I'm just kind of been dabbling in it because I suppose it's part of my own sort of health and connecting more with my body after injury, especially last year. And I ended up working with this amazing woman, Rachel Hall, she's like a Franklin method educator. So essentially what they do is a lot of this sort of, again, using a lot of visualization, understanding of the biomechanics of the body. It's almost like this sort of neuro-linguistic approach to like body movement. But also a lot of it is the embodiment of things in nature, of how water moves and tapping into that. And when we're really passionate also about the ocean and marine conservation. So we've decided to sort of team up. And we've created a workshop called Move Like Water. And it's sort of it's just kind of an experiment really, and it's aimed at women who are working in that space in kind of leadership or activist roles with water in some way. And I think when we're in those positions of like making social change happen or driving impact in the world, we tend to also do a really poor job of like looking after our own health and well-being, ironically.
Huge.
Be sort of pushing hard for change in the world that you can burn yourself out. So it's how to, as we're trying to heal the ocean, how can we also be healed by the work we're doing? So I'm not really sure where it's going to lead yet, and I'm only beginning to learn about it. I'm sure there's definitely people out there who know a lot more, but that's the fun thing.
Yeah, right. And great. Often the most exciting work when you're not quite sure where it's going to go. And I think that's right. And again, just sort of, I think this sort of becoming more self-aware and as a thing generally, again in I guess in my journey of the last decade and the sort of networks I'm working within at the moment, but you see this is even in the last 18 months, because even working on yourself even 18 months ago I think was still potentially sort of slightly sniffed at, but it does feel like again there is we're opening up, or more folks are opening up to the realization of who am I, and the need to work on ourselves in order to be able to go and do the work we want to do in the world. And I guess, you know, you're looking at water here, and there'll be other ways that people are working with. But yeah, so I guess that's the thing, sort of learning from how the natural world works and how natural systems work, and what could we take from that in our own practices is feels like such an interesting, exciting, and super like needed space, you know, for the kinds of shifts I think a lot of us are sort of hoping to see in the world. It just feels, I don't know, I always come back to just, you know, it all starts with yourself, right? I know it's it's a bit cliche, but it does feel like we've got to be working on ourselves along with these other things. Otherwise,
yeah. I think there's this real need for, just to get real with it all, you know, to be a lot more honest about the process rather than, hey, is this really cool, shiny outcome? It's like, you know, about, that need for, I guess, a more radical authenticity of the work that we're doing and how we're doing it. And for me too, it's also kind of related to this thing of when I think about nature connection, and then I try to understand it from my own point of view. And then in particular as a woman, and I've been exploring this last year too, this idea of our own inner cycles, and how, you know, just there are so many cycles and rhythms that we live by, maybe unconsciously in every day in the world. You know, you've got like the lunar phase and then the seasons and the tide, and then I find out why are we designing our lives and our schedules kind of completely oblivious to that, and wondering that when we push really hard, why we're meeting resistance.
Yeah.
I think it's because we're completely out of whack of how, if we could start to mirror, I suppose what I'm trying to say, start to mirror our own sort of inner cycles and energy with what's going on in our environment, and especially the natural environment.
Yeah.
What impact would that have?
Yeah, let's go there. I mean, I think I was chatting to someone recently about this, the construct of time, and, you know, the fact that, you know, the idea of time and, you know, clocks, and we've designed our entire world against this thing, which is just, again, another human invention, right? And so could we even see a time beyond that, more to what you're talking about, I guess, designing more around programming yourself, much more around sort of different types of cycles, right? And there's a colleague of mine, he's doing some work with some kids that are transitioning from primary to secondary around this concept of time. He said it's almost like they're moving from this kind of phase of where, as younger kids, they don't really have any concept of time, you know, but they're moving really fast then into this culture where everything's going to be, you know, about time based, you know, got to be here, clock based, this, that, and just, well, what's that all about, you know, and is, you know what I mean? Because these things, I see, again, I mean, they're all interconnected, right? But this sort of mechanistic, I guess, existence around the clock does also feel sort of like it's wobbling quite severely.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because going back, I guess, to the research, what comes up time and time again when you ask people about like barriers, it's time. Don't have time. If you don't have time to go out and like breathe some fresh air, then something's seriously wrong. Yeah. But even there is, it's sort of, again, it's not time itself. It's our, how we perceive it. And for a lot of people, it's this, And I wonder too, there's really interesting work, and people are looking at it in different ways. And one just comes to mind now is a woman called Katie Bowman, I think. And she wrote this book published recently called Movement Matters. She's really interesting in her approach to, I think she came from a more sort of like physical science background around, you know, say biomechanics and physiotherapy, but her ideas, you know, how we move sort of with and through our environment in our daily lives. And rather than it being this thing, like we have so many of these things that we feel like we need to add on, like, you know, check off, like a checklist. But she has this idea of how can you integrate it into sort of the core tasks that we do need to do every day, so that it doesn't become this extra, but it just becomes integral. So, you know, if we could bring in more, like, say, foraging, food foraging. And it's amazing how you can do that even in more urbanized areas. It's possible. Even on the campus here at NY Galway, we have an incredible gardener who she's kind of really tuned into the seasons as well. But when I first came on campus, it was around April. So there was all this like wild garlic. And then she has all these sort of wild, you know, berries everywhere too when we head into autumn. But so foraging is a great example where you, especially with, say, you've got kids and you need to get them outdoors or get them exercised. you want to have time with them. You need to get food for the dinner, and you get your dose of nature and be active. It ticks all those boxes, and but she kind of has a lot of these real sort of down to earth examples that seem a lot less overwhelming and accessible. So how we think about it differently, and how do you get people, how do you create that shift when these patterns are so ingrained? Even like, I'm saying this now, but like, how often do I go forage myself?
Well, it's not great. It's not great this time of year in this country, but it does get better around sort of spring and definitely autumn, summer and autumn. But yeah, I guess you're right. It's these hacks, isn't it? Into our lives. How do you integrate in these kind of moments in, whether it's
It is more, if you think what it's like, oh, like everyone must know this, but actually it is about just get back to the awareness part, and that was kind of highlighted with this whole like plastics, sort of the anti-plastic news that kind of hit the media and this last week or so, which is really exciting to see. But how it was this sort of new wow thing around, oh, I never thought about my coffee cup that way before, or where a plastic straw ends up, or how much marine litter there actually is. And it's I've been so conscious of it for so long because I'm immersed in that environment, like in the sea every day. And then I realized, oh, this isn't common knowledge. So you need to, again, it goes back when you talk about ocean literacy, which is the education and awareness part. So how do we become a more ocean literate society? And in Ireland, especially being an island nation, it's kind of incredible that it's not more ingrained. I always thought, well, we learn the Safe Cross Code, but we don't learn water safety, when we're in primary school as young kids. So how can we sort of, I suppose, in a way, mainstream that more? And it's a lot of it too is the cultural context and this fear too we hold around water.
Yeah, and I guess, and then it sort of goes up to a little bit. At least my hypothesis is also just the dominant system, which is more separated from nature, mechanistic, logical, extractive. You know what I mean? So even the sort of learning curriculums are sort of less about systems, and they're more about resource, or nature as resource. Or I mean, on the ocean literate thing, for me, it still blows my mind is just even the simple idea of the oceans generating pretty much half the oxygen that we breathe.
I mean, more than
all right. Yeah. But that's just not that's not most people. That's like, what? I thought it was the rainforest, because we're kind of educated to believe the lungs of the world, you know what I mean, was the rainforest. But I don't know what I mean. This ocean literate thing. I mean, what does that mean to you? This whole idea of being ocean literate. What does that?
Good question. And it's interesting because I've been asking people about it as well, and I think it's actually maybe one of the barriers, perhaps even in language. So I know when I first sort of bring up the concept with people, and then they just hear the word like literacy, and I guess because it's maybe to do with like schooling,
eyes glaze.
They immediately think it's something it's academic or difficult, or you have to, it's almost like it feels like more inaccessible.
Yeah. I asked my kids that when I first started working inside. I said, what's ocean literacy? And they sort of looked at me and they both went, litter in the ocean. I was like, yeah, there's definitely a communication problem here with this language.
But I don't think we need to get hung up on that. Then it is about actually what does matter is how we communicate it. So what I do like about the concept is that it's like, how do we read the ocean? And I realized, that was a skill set I was exposed to as a kid. It wasn't learning how to surf. It was really learning how to observe and notice and read the ocean, and then the whole sort of weather system and the wind and all these kind of patterns, both at a local and then sort of at a bigger global or meteorological scale. And so a lot of what it's finding those kinds of ways, it's like bringing that into something where it's like not quite by stealth, but if we're encouraged, how could it be integrated into something like when learning to surf? And it's actually about you also learning first and foremost actually about the ocean and ocean knowledge. And I can see the impact that's had, say, somewhere like Iran, with introducing surfing there, and it creates this connection to that environment that didn't exist before, or at least in a different way, where people feel this direct benefit from being in the sea. And then there's that appreciation, and it sort of naturally lended itself then to that enhanced ocean awareness, and then self-organizing all these beach cleanups. And so they're fully on board, like with the 2-minute beach clean. And I constantly get photos sent on WhatsApp of like the local community there, beach cleans being a part of, like, any time they go surf, there's an organized beach clean. It's incredible. Yeah, so it's maybe those kind of, I think it's what excites me about it is that it opens a space for so many creative possibilities, and being a lot more innovative with it. And and especially for young people.
Do you have a sense of, I'm just sort of curious, as like, what would an ocean literate culture look like or feel like if that, if there was this ability to, like you say, read the ocean almost, and what would be different, do you think?
Wow, I guess
just a small question.
Everything would be different, wouldn't it? I'm just thinking it, because it's so, if you were to operate at that level of awareness or consciousness for how interconnected, our sort of human health and well-being is with the ocean's health and well-being, then it would just affect all our behaviors and decisions. It'd be really a beautiful driver for making decisions if we could do it from that kind of a place of understanding. Not only, I guess, I suppose it's, again, that interconnection of understanding what the ocean can do for us and what we can do for it. So yeah, I'd be curious, because ultimately the ocean is the systems driver of the planet, and it it regulates everything, provides us with oxygen, drives the weather patterns, and is a food source and transport, and so it's integral to so many facets of how we live. It is actually kind of mind-boggling.
And that feels like this. That's just really kind of, it's just not well understood at all. What do you, when you look at when you see glimpses of possibility in this whole area of, obviously the work you're doing, without doubt is all active in this space. But is there anything else that you could point us to, or things that you've seen that you've just gone, there's something about this, or where are the sort of glimpses of beauty and possibility in this kind of whole area of ocean engagement and consciousness?
I think maybe what happens as well, because of how the ocean is perceived as so separate, and we have that separation of land and sea. It wasn't always there, so I think it'd be good to have more of a think about it in terms of more as a system too, and as a water system. If you go back to the water system and make that more alive, because then I think it becomes much more woven into our landscape as well, and then into and ourselves. So I think if we could play with that a lot more and expand even ocean literacy, it goes beyond the confines of the coastline.
Because even rivers, for instance, are sort of like, for many of us, again, in cities, they are really our pathway, our connection to the ocean. But even there, and waterways, and even there's, again, it sort of feels like we've sort of, for many of us, we've lost that understanding.
Yeah, it's almost like we all need to go on our own source to sea journey. And if within our local area, like, actually, what if we could do that and did that in our own local catchment, and followed a water body from source to sea? What would we learn, and what would we learn about ourselves? Wow. That could be a really fun approach. Yeah. So more of those kinds of journeys that combine and like deepening our own understanding of who we are, but at the same time that connection to our environment is really important. Because I think a lot of, I guess, why I feel a bit like wary with or why sometimes it's hard to talk about that working on yourself, is that it's so individualized, and it loses out the importance of community and connection. So I think that's where I suppose nature comes in as this incredible resource. If we can, not resource, I hear using that word resource, but it's part of who we are. That's an
interesting point though. But it is this whole idea, isn't it? It's this phrase of kind of, sort of self, community, the natural world. You've got these three relationships. Those that are around us, the place that's around us and our own selves, and sort of finding a more this that makes up a system, right, in itself, or multiple systems, but it's how do you work on all those different dimensions, I guess, is part of the mission.
Yeah, and how we see it, I suppose, of being much more like this idea of being, even when we think about sustainable development goals, how they're all nested within the, say who we are is nested within, say, our sense of community, which is nested within our local environment, which is, so this idea of it being much more embedded that way, rather than these sort of three pillars.
Right. Exactly. And I think that, it's just sort of slightly just on, I guess, for you've grown up, you grew up, on the northwest coast of Ireland, right with the Atlantic Ocean there. And I guess with all, I guess the places that we grow up in, right, they shape us. And I guess that's also the other thing that I'm always, slightly scratching my head around with some of the work that I'm doing around nature disconnection, but in particular cities. And, we're being shaped by these very constructed environments. And again, I guess it's just having to work harder to find these ways. Or you can see why the gaps are opening up, right? You can see why people are becoming more separated, less conscious, unaware, because we're being shaped by environments that are, that aren't kind of thoughtful and alive and curious. I know they've got their own magic as well, but do you know what I mean? There's this constant flux of it. I guess that's what I'm interested in, and particularly with oceans, how to bring that, how we can find different ways of making those connections in I guess in places which are quite removed.
Yeah, and I also really like Ayanna Johnson. She sort of founded Ocean Collective, of which I'm a member, just last year, and she's this marine biologist based in New York, and her big thing at the moment is this concept around urban oceans. So it's amazing. She's doing incredible work with different organizations in New York City and the Hudson Bay and Hudson River. But we often don't think of, like, most of like the world's sort of biggest cities are on the sea. And we don't really have that concept of urban ocean.
Nice. I like that.
So I really like that in terms of impact as well. I think, like, if creating change, that's where most of the world's people are too. So if you could tap into that, then you perhaps have a much greater impact. No,
it's interesting. I should connect. I know there's a project in London that's been going on, which is sort of trying to coin this phrase, London on Sea, and which is actually again around sort of plastic pollutions, but trying to help kind of Londoners sort of reimagine that we are sort of on the sea as well, which feels which is absolutely right. Fascinating challenges ahead. So I'm conscious of time. We could probably just keep going, but just tell me a little bit for sort of coming to sort of closes, but like water this year, what's on this year? What are your focus areas?
I guess the focus has been, I kind of really feel that, like, for 2018, the word that keeps coming up is collaboration. So just discovering that there's an amazing kind of network of women out there with these really powerful stories of their own sort of water connection. So part of like water, there's a blog series kind of bi-monthly called Women Who Run with the Waves. So it's a really cool like lens and way to share that water connection, and I suppose not just with the sea and not just surfing either. So more of that, more sort of bold and creative storytelling, I think is on the cards. And then this exploration around like really digging more deeply into the metaphor of water and the sea and our bodies. So with this Move Like Water workshop coming up as well. And of course, I suppose with the Wavemaker Collective, how we can draw more upon like what we can learn from these systems and from the ocean, and how we can apply that in the work that we do and lives that we lead. That really excites me as well. How we make the intangible more real, and the ocean more seen and heard.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
that sounds like a rich year ahead. Well, thank you, Easkey, for that. That was an hour and a half. Didn't feel like it, did it?
No, it flew by. Yeah.
Just so, actually, the final thing I was going to ask you. So,
Mm.
this theme that I'm exploring is of the Spaceship Earth, and there's a great phrase of the Spaceship Earth, which is, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're all crew. And so I'm just curious, when we think about the ocean, what would be the shout out for people when it comes to the ocean, and when it comes to if we're shouting out to the crew of people out there in the world, what should we be inviting them to explore or be curious about?
That's a good question. Yeah, it'd be really cool to create more of a conversation around going back almost full circle. What interests me most is how we connect with the sea and with the ocean. So maybe I'm curious how people would see it in their own lives, like one way that I guess the ocean has an effect on them and who they are and how they live, and maybe one way they could connect with it.
Nice. Excellent. Well,
yeah, all about connection.
Yeah, I know. It's what we can come back to, isn't it? It's just, that's the thing. It's in many ways, it's as simple as that, isn't it? We've just got to kind of open up, notice, be more open to what's probably happening right in front of us half the time.
Yeah.
But listen, thank you for taking the time out for this. And good luck with. Are you on the road at all right now, or in the near future?
Actually, no. I'm kind of spending much more time at home, which is really lovely, actually. And it's like the best time of year to be here for surf. So, so there's less travel on the cards. Hopefully, less travel and more presencing. But I had a conversation with a friend the other day about this sort of just how grounding it's felt to spend more time being in one place and being this sense of home, I suppose, and exploring what that means. But also how I think Ireland is home for me, and it's something, also being on an island, you do need to travel every now and again as well, because as my friend said, the center doesn't always come to you then. You have to go out, but it also lends itself to shifting perspectives and coming back with fresh insights. So there's that lovely exchange, I feel. But at the moment, I've been in this place almost like having this sort of resistance to moving too far, which is unusual. But I'm sure that will change.
Yeah,
but I've just discovered that it's quite an auspicious day to record the podcast because it's Virginia Woolf's birthday.
So
it's quite fitting, I felt. Apparently she's 100. She'd be 136 years old now, or 136 years since she was born. Yeah.
Wow.
Just one of her quotes kind of come to mind of what we're talking about here, in a way of how, the way we see things and how we shift perspective. And one of her quotes is, you see things and you say, why? But I dream things that never were and say, why not? So, we need to maybe a bit more, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why not?
Yeah, why not?
That's a hashtag if there's ever
one. All right, there you go. Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you so much, Easkey.
You too.
And then I'll obviously be in touch with the wave maker, and really look forward to seeing you in the real world.
I know, goodness. Yeah, actually, to connect in person. Yes.
Heavens forbid. Fantastic. Really looking forward. Look, thanks
so much for all your time and for reaching out and making this happen now.
Oh, it's great. It's brilliant.
Fantastic. Thanks.
All right, speak to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye-bye.
So there we go, folks. I really hope you enjoyed that. Do check out more of Easkey's work at easkeyBritton.com, and definitely jump in the water more often if you can. If you want to get hold of me, hit me up, dan@danburgess.earth. And remember, folks, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We are all crew. Until next time, peace and out. You're listening to the Spaceship Earth with Dan Burgess.